The day began like any ordinary morning for the billionaire, though he rarely had ordinary days anymore. His schedule was usually packed with meetings, calls, and plans for new projects. But on this particular morning, he chose to take a quiet drive through one of the neighborhoods where he had funded a small community center years ago. He liked checking in on places he had once known, even if he did it quietly and without cameras or public announcements. It made him feel connected to something real, something beyond his wealth. The streets were calm, the few shopkeepers opening their doors and sweeping their entryways. Some children walked toward a nearby school, backpacks hanging loosely on their shoulders. The billionaire drove slowly, almost lost in thought, until he noticed something unusual near an old apartment building. At first, he thought he was mistaken, but as he got closer, his expression changed, and he felt his chest tighten slightly. 3 small children stood outside the building. They looked very similar, around the same age, and their matching faces made it clear they were triplets. Their clothes were worn and a bit dusty, and they each held a tiny bag that didn't look like it carried much. They stood close together, almost as if they were trying to protect one another from the world. Their eyes held a mixture of sadness and confusion, something no child should have to feel. Just as he slowed down to see if they needed help, the door of the apartment building swung open. A woman appeared, her face tense and her voice sharp. She spoke loudly, though the billionaire couldn't hear every word. What he did hear was enough to send a chill through him. She told the children to leave immediately. She sounded frustrated, impatient, and completely cold. The triplets didn't argue. They simply took a step back as if this was not the first time something like this had happened. The woman pointed down the street, as if directing them away from the building. Then, without a moment of hesitation, she slammed the door shut. The sound echoed through the quiet street, making the scene feel even heavier. The triplets stared at the closed door for a long moment, their small shoulders drooping. One of them wiped their eyes quickly, trying not to cry in front of the others. The billionaire sat silently in his car, watching the whole scene unfold. A part of him wanted to get out instantly, but he also didn't want to frighten the children or approach them at a bad moment. He took a deep breath and parked his car a little distance away, stepping out carefully. He wasn't used to approaching strangers on the street, especially children, but something in his heart pulled him forward. He felt an unusual need to make sure they were all right. He walked slowly, making sure not to appear threatening or intimidating. When he got closer, the triplets noticed him. They didn't run, but they didn't smile either. They simply stared up at him with wide, uncertain eyes. He gave them a gentle smile and crouched down slightly so he wouldn't tower over them. "Are you 3 okay?" he asked softly. The children exchanged glances, as if silently deciding who should speak. Finally, one of them stepped forward a bit and nodded politely, though it was clear things were not okay at all. The billionaire could see the fear lingering in their faces. The kind of fear that comes from being unsure of where to go or what would happen next. "You look like you've been out here for a while," he continued. "Do you need help? Or maybe food?" At the mention of food, their eyes shifted again. Hunger was something they clearly understood, but none of them reached out or asked for anything. They simply stood there with a quiet dignity that made the billionaire admire their strength even more. He didn't want to overwhelm them, so he kept his voice calm and warm. "My car is just over there. If you're comfortable, I can take you somewhere safe. Maybe get you something to eat. You don't have to be scared." The child who stepped forward earlier looked back at the others. After a moment, all 3 nodded. It wasn't a big nod, but it was enough. The billionaire felt relieved and guided them gently toward his car. He opened the back door, and the triplets climbed in slowly, sitting close together as though they feared losing each other even for a moment. As he started driving, he kept glancing at them through the rearview mirror. They sat quietly, not talking much, their little hands holding onto their tiny bags. The billionaire wondered what was inside those bags. Maybe a few clothes, maybe nothing more than small belongings that reminded them of home. He decided to stop at a small cafe he often visited. It was quiet, calm, and run by friendly staff who wouldn't question him too much. He parked the car and led the children inside. The warm smell of fresh bread and tea filled the air. The triplets looked around slowly, as if unsure whether they were allowed to enjoy something so comforting. "Sit anywhere you like," the billionaire said, pointing to one of the booths. They chose the corner booth and sat side by side. Their hands resting on the table, a waiter approached, and the billionaire ordered simple food sandwiches, fruit, warm drinks, nothing too heavy. Knowing the children might not have eaten properly in days, when the plates arrived, the triplets hesitated for a moment, then began eating quietly, almost politely. Even though it was clear they were starving, watching them broke something inside the billionaire. He had seen poverty before. He had helped countless families. But something about these three children touched a deeper part of him. Maybe it was the way they stuck together, or the silence in their eyes, or the fact that they had been thrown out so casually. He felt responsible somehow, even though he didn't know them yet. When they finished eating, he gently asked, "Can you tell me what happened back there? Why were you outside the building?" The oldest-looking child looked at the other two again, as if checking whether it was okay to speak. They nodded slowly. The child took a deep breath. "She doesn't want us anymore," the child said in a soft voice. "She said we bring too much trouble. She said we should leave." The billionaire felt his throat tighten. His eyes lowered slightly, absorbing the pain in those simple words. "Is she your mother?" he asked quietly. All three shook their heads. "She's a relative," another one said. "She took us in when our parents were gone." The billionaire didn't interrupt. He let them talk, even when their voices trembled a little. They explained how the woman became colder over time, treating them more like a burden than children. They did chores every day, hardly ate enough, and lived in constant fear. And that morning, she told them to get out and never return. The billionaire wanted to express how wrong all of that was, but he didn't want to overwhelm them with emotions. Instead, he leaned forward and said, "You don't have to go back there. You're safe right now. I promise." They looked at him again with those big, uncertain eyes. A small spark of hope flickered in them, but they were too cautious to trust easily. He didn't blame them. Trust was something that had clearly been broken many times before. "Do you have any other family?" he asked gently. They shook their heads again. Then one of them took out an old, worn photograph from their tiny bag. It was a picture of their parents, smiling brightly. The billionaire held the picture carefully, treating it as if it were something precious. He could tell how much the children missed their parents just by the way they looked at the photo. He handed it back slowly. "Thank you for showing me," he said softly. A long silence settled between them, but it wasn't uncomfortable. It was a moment of understanding. Three small children who had lost everything, and one man who suddenly felt responsible for their future, even though he didn't know exactly why. After a few minutes, the billionaire took a deep breath. "Would you allow me to help you?" he asked. "Maybe for today, I can give you a place to rest. We can figure out the rest together." The triplets looked at each other again, communicating silently the way siblings often do. Then they turned back to him and nodded, this time a little more confidently. The billionaire offered a gentle smile. For the first time, he saw a small, fragile smile appear on one of the children's faces. And in that moment, he knew that meeting them wasn't an accident. Something had brought him there at the exact moment they needed someone the most. Something bigger than chance, and he wasn't going to walk away. After leaving the cafe, the billionaire guided the triplets back to his car. The sun had risen higher by then, warming the city streets. But the children still held themselves close, as if the world around them felt too big and too unsure. They followed him quietly, each step light and cautious. He opened the back door for them, and they climbed in, just like before, sitting close together. Their tiny bags held against their laps, as if those bags were the last pieces of their old life they were unwilling to let go of. He started the car slowly, not wanting to rush them or startle them. As he drove, he tried to think of where he should take them next. He knew he needed a place where they could rest, talk, and feel safe. He had several properties around the city, but he didn't want to take them to a giant mansion where everything was polished and cold. Children who had just been thrown out did not need marble floors or shiny hallways. They needed warmth, quiet, and the feeling of being protected. There was a small guest house he owned on the edge of the city. It wasn't large, but it was comfortable, peaceful, and close to nature. He rarely used it, which made it perfect for this moment. The triplets could relax without the fear of strangers or noise. As he drove, he kept glancing at them through the mirror. They looked a little less tense now, though their expressions were still careful, as if they were waiting for something bad to happen again. He wondered how long they had lived like they're always expecting trouble, always trying not to make a mistake. After a few minutes, he spoke gently. "You don't have to answer anything you don't want to. But if you feel comfortable, can you tell me more about how long you stayed with that woman?" The oldest-looking child shifted slightly, then looked at the others for silent permission. When both younger ones nodded, the child turned toward the billionaire's voice, though their eyes stayed on their knees. "A long time," the child said softly. "Ever since our parents went away." The billionaire didn't press them with questions. Instead, he let the silence stay for a moment, giving them space to continue only if they wanted to. After a quiet pause, the middle child spoke up, their voice tiny but steady. "She didn't want us. She only took us because people told her she had to. After some months, she said we cost too much. She said we eat too much. She said we make her tired." The words hurt to hear. Children should never have to repeat sentences like that, sentences that made them feel unwanted in their own home. "Did she ever show you kindness?" the billionaire asked softly. All three shook their heads at the same time. It was a small gesture, but full of meaning. He felt a heaviness settle in his chest, a sadness for everything they had endured. The youngest child hugged their tiny bag and whispered, "We tried to be good. We always tried." The billionaire felt his throat tighten again. He hated that these children felt the need to prove their worth to someone who never deserved them in the first place. "You didn't do anything wrong," he said gently. "What she did wasn't your fault. Not even a little." They didn't reply, but he saw their shoulders lift slightly, as though a tiny bit of weight had been removed. He continued driving, making every effort to keep the car ride calm. He didn't talk too much, knowing that sometimes silence was safer for children who had spent years trying not to say the wrong thing. Instead, he let them watch the scenery outside the windows, trees, shops, people walking, birds perched on wires. Normal life. Something they deserved to be part of. After some time, they reached the guest house. It was a cozy little place with light-colored walls and a small porch. Flowers grew beside the walkway, planted years ago by the gardener who visited every few weeks. The children looked at the house with curiosity, but also caution. They didn't move until the billionaire opened the car door and said in a calm tone, "It's okay. This place is safe." They followed him slowly, glancing around as if trying to understand whether this was real or just another temporary stop. He opened the front door and stepped aside so they could enter first. The living room was warm and smelled faintly of wood. Sunlight filtered through the windows, making the space feel welcoming. The triplets walked inside carefully, almost silently, as if they were scared of damaging something. The billionaire noticed this and spoke reassuringly. "You don't have to be afraid. This house is meant to be lived in. You can sit anywhere you like." They approached the sofa and sat down side by side, small hands resting on their bags. Their feet barely touched the floor. "Would you like some water? Or maybe something warm to drink?" he asked. One of them nodded softly. "Water is okay." He brought them glasses of water and set them gently on the table. They thanked him quietly, their voices polite and controlled. He could tell they were used to being careful with their words. Once they seemed settled, he pulled a chair closer, but made sure to keep a comfortable distance, not wanting to overwhelm them. He sat down slowly and gave them a small, warm smile. "I know today has been stressful," he began. "I'm going to help you. But before I do anything big, I want to understand what you've been through. Only if you feel ready to talk." They exchanged looks again, the kind of silent conversation siblings develop when they grow up, depending only on each other. Finally, the middle child took a small breath. "Our parents loved us a lot," the child said. "We lived in a small apartment, but it was nice. We played games. We shared toys. We had warm food, and then," the billionaire asked gently. The youngest child spoke next. "They had an accident. Everyone said it wasn't their fault, but they didn't come back. The billionaire's heart broke a little more. He didn't interrupt. He let the child continue at their own pace. We stayed with the woman after that, because she was family. That's what people told us. But she didn't treat us like family. What did she do? He asked softly. She made us do all the chores. Cleaning, washing dishes, carrying things, the oldest said. She didn't like when we talked. She didn't like when we laughed. She said, we were too loud. Even when we were quiet, the billionaire felt anger rise inside him, not the explosive kind, but the slow, painful kind that comes when you hear about innocent children being mistreated. Did she ever hit you? He asked carefully, keeping his voice soft and non-threatening. He needed to know for their safety. But he also didn't want to force them into painful memories. All three shook their heads quickly. No, the oldest said. She didn't do that. She just yelled, a lot. And she didn't give us much food. She said that food costs money, and that we should be grateful for whatever she gave. Malnourishment, neglect, emotional cruelty. Sometimes those forms of harm left deeper scars than anything else. Did you go to school? He asked. The youngest shook their head. We stayed home. She said school is expensive. She didn't want to take us anywhere. So the billionaire felt his stomach twist. Keeping them out of school meant she wasn't just neglecting them. She was trying to erase their future. One of the children spoke again. Sometimes she left us alone for hours. We didn't know when she'd come back. And today? He asked. The middle child swallowed slowly. Today, she woke up angry. She said she didn't want us anymore. She said she was tired. She told us to take our bags and leave. She pushed us toward the door. The youngest added in a small voice, she said we ruined her life. The billionaire leaned back slightly, overwhelmed by the cruelty of those words. He kept his expression gentle, though, because the children were watching him carefully, checking whether their story upset him. I'm so sorry you had to hear that, he said quietly. You didn't ruin anything. You didn't deserve any of what happened to you. The oldest child looked at him for a long moment, eyes shining faintly with something between pain and hope. Why are you helping us? The child asked in a trembling voice. It was a simple question, but it struck him deeply. He took a moment before answering. Because someone should have helped you a long time ago, he said softly. And because no child should ever feel alone in this world. Not when someone can step in and do something. They didn't say anything, but he saw their expressions soften, their shoulders relax just slightly. For the first time since he'd met them, they looked like they were beginning to believe they might be safe. A little later, he showed them the small guest room where they could rest. There were 2 beds, soft blankets, and warm lighting. The children stepped inside slowly, examining the space the way one might examine a fragile gift. You can sleep here tonight, he said, together. I won't separate you. Their faces softened even more at those words. Being together was clearly everything to them. And tomorrow, he continued, we'll take things one step at a time. But I promise you won't go back to that woman. Not ever. The children didn't speak, but their silence spoke loudly. It was the silence of relief, the quiet breath of someone who finally felt the tiniest hint of safety as he walked out of the room. He saw all 3 triplets sitting on the edge of the bed, holding their tiny bags, staring at the blankets as if unsure whether they were allowed to touch something so comfortable. He smiled gently and closed the door halfway, leaving it open just enough so they would know he was nearby. That night, he didn't sleep much. He sat in the living room, thinking deeply about everything he had learned. He felt responsible now, not just for their safety tonight, but for their future. He couldn't walk away. Something inside him had already changed. And somewhere in the guest room, 3 small children finally lay down on soft beds after months of fear and uncertainty. They whispered to each other quietly, reminding one another that they were still together. That maybe, just maybe, their life was about to change. None of them knew it yet. But this moment marked the beginning of something that would change all their lives forever. The next morning arrived softly, with sunlight slipping through the curtains of the guest house. The billionaire had barely slept, but he still woke up early. His thoughts kept returning to the triplets, what they had been through, what might happen next, and what he needed to do to make sure they would be safe. Not just for a day or a week, but forever. He walked quietly toward the guest room, wondering if the children had slept at all. Before he could knock, he heard small whispers inside, the gentle voices of the triplets talking among themselves. It sounded like they were checking whether everything they experienced yesterday had really happened, whether they were truly in a warm house, whether they were allowed to rest, whether someone finally cared. He knocked softly and waited. The door opened slowly, and the oldest-looking child peeked out. The billionaire gave a small smile. "Good morning," he said gently. "Did you sleep all right?" The child nodded a little. "We slept." "Good," the child replied, choosing words carefully. "I'm glad," he said. "Are the others awake?" The child opened the door wider, and he saw the younger two sitting on the bed, hugging their tiny bags. Their eyes were brighter than yesterday, though still cautious, like someone who has seen too many uncertain days to believe completely in a new one. "I made breakfast," he said kindly. "If you're hungry, you can join me in the kitchen." The children exchanged looks, the silent kind again, and then all three nodded. They followed him slowly down the hallway. Their steps were soft, almost quiet enough to disappear. They weren't used to walking freely in a home. He had made simple food: tea, bread, eggs, and fruit. Nothing fancy, but warm and enough. The children sat together at the small kitchen table, waiting patiently for permission to eat. He noticed this and felt another painful pull at his heart. "You don't need to wait," he said softly. "You can eat whenever you like." They nodded and began eating, taking small bites at first, then relaxing just a little when they realized no one would scold them while they ate. He sat across from them, thinking of how to start the conversation. He didn't want to overwhelm them, but he needed to understand more about their past, especially their parents. Something about the story didn't sit right with him. He couldn't explain it, but a part of him felt there was more to uncover. "After breakfast," he said gently, "I want to help you. But to do that, I need to understand everything clearly. Only if you're comfortable telling me, of course." The children glanced at each other. Finally, the middle one nodded. "You can ask," the child said quietly. He leaned forward slightly. "Do you remember anything about your parents' accident?" They looked down, their small hands touching the edges of their bags. The oldest one spoke first. "People said it was an accident on the road," the child said. "A car crash. Did anyone ever visit you after? Anyone from a government office? Or someone who said they were checking on you?" The children shook their heads. "No one came," the youngest said. "Just the woman. She said she had to take us." "And did she ever show any papers? Or talk to anyone outside about you?" All three shook their heads again. The billionaire felt a quiet suspicion forming in his mind. If no one had checked on them, if no one had followed up, then maybe the children were never officially placed with that woman. Maybe someone had lied. He didn't want to say any of this to the children yet, not without proof. He changed the subject gently. "Do you know where your parents used to work?" The middle child nodded. "Father worked at a workshop. Mother stayed home. Do you remember where the workshop was?" The child hesitated, thinking deeply. "It was near a big road. We went there one time. It had a red sign." The billionaire knew many workshops, but the detail of the red sign was a good start. He smiled gently. "Thank you. That helps a lot." The youngest child looked up at him quietly and asked, "Are we in trouble?" The question broke his heart in a way he didn't expect. Children shouldn't be scared of adults helping them. Children shouldn't fear punishment for simply existing. "No," he said softly. "You're not in trouble, not ever. I'm here to help you." The children nodded slowly, as if wanting to believe him, after breakfast. He gave them some time to rest and play in the living room. He watched them from a distance. The youngest two sat on the floor, spreading their tiny bags out, looking at their belongings: small pencils, a couple of folded papers, the old photo of their parents. They touched each item gently, as if these tiny things held all the love they had left. The oldest child walked over to the window, staring outside with a thoughtful expression. When the billionaire approached slowly, the child didn't move away. "Do you miss your parents a lot?" he asked softly. The child nodded. "Every day." He placed a gentle hand on the back of the sofa, not touching the child, but offering presents. "I'm sure they loved you very much." The child nodded again, their eyes glistening. "They did. They always hugged us. They always told us we were there, everything." The billionaire felt his chest tighten again, with a mixture of sadness and sadness for the children's loss. Anger at the world for failing them. After giving them time to relax, he made a decision. He needed to investigate their past. He needed to know exactly what happened to their parents and how they ended up with a woman who clearly never cared for them. But he didn't want to leave them alone. Not after everything. So he explained gently, "I need to go into the city for a little while today. Just to check something important. I don't want you to be scared. I'll be back. But I'll bring someone you can trust to stay here with you while I'm gone. Is that okay?" The triplets hesitated, not because they didn't trust him, but because being left by an adult even for a short time felt frightening. He understood. So he added, "I won't leave you with a stranger. I'll bring someone kind. Someone who will take care of you." After a moment, the oldest said softly, "Okay." He made a phone call to a longtime employee, a caretaker from one of his smaller properties. This caretaker had a warm personality and had experience with children. The billionaire trusted him completely. He asked him to come to the guest house and stay with the triplets. When the caretaker arrived, the billionaire introduced him gently, making sure the triplets felt safe. The caretaker greeted them warmly, smiling in a calm, gentle way. The children looked nervous at first, but his soft tone helped them relax slightly. Before leaving, the billionaire knelt down to the children's level. "I will come back," he promised. "I'm going to learn more about your parents. I want to understand everything." The middle child asked quietly, "Will you come back today?" "Yes," he said firmly. "Today?" Only then did the children nod, accepting his promise. He stepped outside, got into his car, and began driving toward the part of the city that had several workshops. He scanned the roads, looking for the workshop with a red sign. The memory of the triplets sitting quietly at the table pushed him forward. He felt responsible not only to give them safety, but to give them truth. After searching for a while, he finally found a workshop with a faded red sign hanging above the entrance. It looked old and worn, as if the years hadn't been kind to it. He parked the car and stepped out. Inside the workshop, several workers were busy with repairs. An older man looked up, surprised to see a billionaire in such a modest place. The billionaire approached him gently and said, "I'm looking for information about a worker who used to be employed here." The man raised an eyebrow. "What's the name?" The billionaire didn't know the parents' names. He realized this and felt a brief wave of worry he had never asked. But he remembered the photo the children showed him. He reached into his pocket, where he had kept a copy of the photo he quietly snapped with permission. He showed it to the man. "Do you recognize either of them?" The man stared at the photo for a moment. Then his expression changed. "Yes," the man said slowly. "I know him. He used to work here. Good man, hard worker. Always talked about his kids. Sad what happened." The billionaire's heartbeat quickened. "Can you tell me what you know?" The man wiped his hands on a cloth and lowered his voice a little. "People said it was a road accident. But I never believed the story." Paused, looking around. The details never made sense. The billionaire felt a cold feeling spread through his chest. "What do you mean?" The man leaned closer. "The day it happened, he told me he had found something important. Something big. He was worried. Said he was being watched. Watched by who?" The man shook his head. He didn't say. Just said he was scared. Later that week, he and his wife were gone. People called it an accident, but no one looked into it. The billionaire stood very still, absorbing every word. The triplets' parents had feared something. They felt threatened, and then they died. "Do you know where the accident happened?" the billionaire asked. "Near the old bridge, outside the city," the man said. But the reports disappeared. No one talked about it again. Reports disappeared. Important discovery. fear of being watched. Nothing about this sounded like a simple tragedy. "Do you know if they had any other relatives?" he asked. The man thought for a moment. "Just one, a distant relative, but they weren't close." It was strange that she got the children. No one came to check. The billionaire felt anger burn quietly inside him, not the kind that explodes, but the kind that motivates. Someone had failed these children. Someone had hidden the truth. Before leaving, he thanked the man sincerely and continued investigating. He visited an old police station, but he found nothing, no records of the accident, no reports, nothing. It was as if the event had been erased. The more he searched, the more convinced he became. Something was wrong with the story of the parents. Death. He returned to the guest house in the late afternoon. The children were sitting in the living room with the caretaker, quietly drawing on pieces of paper the caretaker had given them. When they saw the billionaire walk in, their faces softened with relief. "You came back," the youngest whispered. He smiled. "I promised I would." They ran to him, still careful, still hesitant, but with a growing sense of trust. He knelt down to meet them at eye level. "I learned a few things today," he said gently, "but I need more time to understand everything. What I can tell you is this: your parents were good people, very good people. And something about their story doesn't feel right. I'm going to find the truth." The children listened quietly, their small hands clasping together. "You will not face this alone," he said. "I'm here. I'm not leaving." The oldest child swallowed slowly and whispered, "Thank you." He placed a hand gently on the child's shoulder. "We'll uncover everything, one step at a time." That night, the billionaire sat in the living room long after the triplets had gone to sleep. He felt protective in a way he had never expected. These children had been thrown away by the very person who should have cared for them. Their parents had loved them deeply, and their deaths carried secrets no one had ever tried to understand. He was determined to uncover the truth, not for himself, but for the 3 little lives now sleeping safely under his roof. And with each passing hour, he could feel that this story was much bigger than he first imagined. The hours after the billionaire discovered the full truth felt strangely heavy, as if everything around him had slowed down just enough for him to hear his own heartbeat. He sat inside his car for a long moment, hands resting on the steering wheel, staring ahead while trying to process everything he had learned. The triplets' parents had not only lived honest lives, but they had also been loved in their community. Their sudden passing had shocked everyone, and the children should have been surrounded with care. Instead, the person who promised to look after them only used them for support money, treated them poorly, and threw them out when the money stopped coming in. The billionaire couldn't shake off the weight of that knowledge. He kept seeing the 3 little faces in his mind, tired, scared, but still hopeful that someone would listen. He had listened. Now he needed to act. He took a deep breath, started the car, and drove straight to the nearest child protection office. The building wasn't large, but inside it felt more serious than any boardroom he had ever sat in. As he entered, a soft voice greeted him from behind a counter. "Good afternoon, sir. How may I help you today?" He explained everything clearly, carefully choosing his words to avoid sounding emotional. Even though inside he felt a strong mix of anger and protectiveness, the woman behind the desk listened closely, taking notes, asking questions, and making sure she understood every detail. When he showed her the documents and photos he had collected, her expression tightened. She immediately called in a supervisor. The supervisor, a calm man with sharp eyes, joined them in a small office and asked the billionaire to go through the story again from the beginning. He listened with full attention, occasionally nodding or writing something down. When the billionaire finished, the supervisor leaned back in his chair and let out a slow breath. "This is serious," he said quietly, "and we're going to act fast. You've done the right thing by bringing this to us. We'll need to speak with the children and the relative, but from what you've shown us, the children's safety must come first." Hearing those words gave the billionaire a strange mix of relief and nervousness. He wasn't used to relying on others. People usually relied on him. But right now, he needed the law to move, and he needed it to move quickly. The supervisor arranged for 2 officers to accompany the billionaire back to the guest house where the children were staying. When they arrived, the triplets were sitting around a small table, coloring quietly with supplies the house staff had brought them. As soon as they saw the billionaire walk in, their faces lit up. They stood up quickly, running over to him the way children do when they trust someone without any doubt. He knelt down and greeted them warmly, telling them gently that some people were there to help make sure they would always be safe. The officers approached slowly so they wouldn't frighten the kids, speaking in soft, reassuring voices. After spending time talking with them and noting their condition, they agreed that immediate protective measures were necessary. Later that day, the authorities met with the relative. The conversation wasn't loud, but it was firm. When questioned, she tried to defend herself, saying she had done her best and that the children were too much trouble. She shrugged, trying to make it sound normal, but the officers had already seen the evidence. They had heard the children's quiet, honest words, and they had spoken with neighbors who weren't afraid to tell the truth. The billionaire didn't stay for the full conversation. He didn't need to hear excuses. Instead, he stepped outside and sat in his car, watching the passing traffic while waiting for the officers to finish. His heart felt heavy, not because of what the relative said, but because he wished someone had stepped in earlier. If he had just happened to walk down that street a day later, or an hour later, the children could have been wandering alone somewhere with no help at all. He hated thinking about that possibility. When the officers finally returned, they informed him that the children were officially under protective care. The relative would face an investigation for financial misuse and neglect. For now, the triplets were not to return to her home under any condition. The billionaire nodded silently, feeling grateful that things were moving in the right direction. But as they drove back to the guest house, he kept thinking about what would happen to the children next. Protection was good, but they needed more than that. They needed stability, warmth, someone to cheer for them on their good days and hold their hands on the bad ones. That evening, the children were quieter than usual, as if sensing the day had been important, even though they didn't fully understand what had happened. After dinner, they sat together on the sofa, leaning against each other. The billionaire sat across from them, watching peacefully. He didn't want to pressure them with heavy questions or big promises. Instead, he simply stayed present, answering their small questions and enjoying their gentle company. At one point, the oldest of the triplets raised their head and asked, "Are we going to be okay?" The question was innocent, but it carried a lifetime of worry. The billionaire took a slow breath before replying. "Yes," he said softly. "You're going to be okay. I promise I will not let anything bad happen to you again." The child nodded, as if accepting those words as truth. Trust came to them easily when someone showed even a little bit of care. They hadn't yet learned to be suspicious of kindness. It's a way abandoned children sometimes do. Later, after the children fell asleep, the billionaire stepped outside onto the balcony. The night air was cool, and the city lights stretched across the distance like a glowing blanket. He stood there thinking for a long time. His life had been shaped by numbers, deals, investments, and constant movement. But in just a couple of days, everything felt different. He realized he wasn't thinking about his schedule, business calls, or meetings. Instead, he was thinking about 3 small children who had no one else. He remembered their tired faces and how they brightened when he talked to them. The kind of bond forming between them wasn't planned, it was something deeper. Something that made him feel responsible in a way he hadn't felt in years. The next morning, he met with the child protection team again. They thanked him for his involvement and assured him that the children's case would be handled carefully. They explained the next steps: temporary placement, psychological evaluation, and paperwork for long-term protection. As they spoke, the billionaire listened patiently, but something inside him felt uneasy. He didn't want the triplets moved from place to place. They had already been through too much. They needed consistency, not another temporary home. And he didn't want to lose them from his life. Not now, not after everything. When the meeting ended, the supervisor asked him gently, "Would you like to remain involved in their case?" Sometimes caring adults choose to stay connected so the children don't feel abandoned again. The billionaire answered without hesitation, "Yes, I want to stay involved. As much as I'm allowed. The supervisor nodded, and then, after a brief pause, added, if you ever consider taking on a more permanent role, let us know. Some children need someone exactly like you. The words lingered in the billionaire's mind long after he left the office. He had never imagined himself in such a position. He had spent most of his life chasing goals, solving problems, and building an empire. But this helping 3 young children rebuild their lives felt like something greater than all his achievements combined. Over the next few days, he spent as much time with the triplets as he could. They played board games, read picture books, went for small walks in the garden, and shared simple meals. The staff began noticing something heartwarming. The billionaire, who was known for being serious and distant at public events, was suddenly smiling more, even laughing quietly at the children's jokes. One afternoon, the youngest tripped while running and scraped a knee. They didn't cry loudly, but their eyes filled with tears. The billionaire hurried over, gently reassuring them while cleaning the scrape with the first aid kit. The child held onto his sleeve for comfort, something that surprised him at first, but quickly felt natural. In that moment, he realized the children weren't just grateful, they felt safe with him. A few days later, the authorities completed their initial review and informed the billionaire that the children would soon need to be moved to a long-term placement. The idea made his chest tighten. He didn't want to imagine them leaving the guest house, pulling their small bags again, walking into another unfamiliar place. That night, he sat alone in his living room, thinking deeply. He thought of the day he first saw them being pushed out onto the street. He thought of the trembling way they had spoken when they told their story. He thought of how they now held his hand without fear, and he realized something very simple, very powerful. He didn't want to lose them. Not now, not ever. The next morning, he returned to the Child Protection Office. He sat down with the supervisor, his voice steady but firm. I want to take responsibility for them, he said. I want to make sure they grow up safe. I don't want them to be moved around again. The supervisor studied him for a long moment, as if trying to read his sincerity. Finally, he nodded. We can begin the process, he said. But it won't be simple. It will take time. And you must be prepared for paperwork, interviews, and evaluations. I'm prepared, the billionaire replied quietly. With those words, the first steps toward a new future were set in motion. The children remained unaware of the details, but they could feel the shift in the air. The billionaire seemed lighter when he was around them, more at peace with the direction things were heading, and they grew even closer to him, trusting him without questioning why. One evening, as they all sat together, watching the sunset from the balcony, the oldest child leaned against his arm and whispered, "Thank you for everything." He didn't respond right away. Instead, he looked out at the warm sky, feeling a sense of calm he hadn't felt in years. After a moment, he answered quietly, "You don't need to thank me. I'm the one who should be grateful." The children didn't fully understand what he meant, but the gentle tone in his voice made them smile. The next chapter of their lives had not officially begun yet, but everyone who saw them together could tell that something big had already changed. The billionaire wasn't just helping the triplets. He was forming a family without even realizing it. And deep in his heart, he knew that whatever came next, he would do everything possible to protect them, support them, and make sure they never felt alone again. The days that followed felt different from anything that Billionaire had ever experienced. For the first time in a long while, he woke up thinking about someone other than himself or his work. He thought about whether the triplets were warm enough at night, whether they had eaten well, whether they were scared or confused about all the changes happening around them. He found himself checking on them more often than necessary. Not because the staff couldn't be trusted, but because he simply felt better seeing them with his own eyes. Whenever he walked into their room, the children would brighten instantly. They ran to him as if he had been gone for days instead of minutes. Their trust felt natural, effortless, something he didn't have to earn with money or status, but with kindness. As the process to gain responsibility for them moved forward, he dedicated almost all his spare time to learning what children their age needed. He searched for books about emotional recovery, talked to counselors, and even invited child specialists to have conversations with him, so he could understand how to support the triplets in the best possible way. People who worked with him were surprised by how invested he was. They had never seen him read so much or ask so many questions that had nothing to do with business. One evening, while the children were having dinner, the billionaire stepped into a private room to join a video meeting with a child psychologist who had reviewed the triplets' background. The psychologist spoke gently but directly. "They've gone through a lot, but they are still emotionally open," he said. "That means they can heal well if they feel safe and loved consistently." The billionaire nodded slowly. "I want to make sure they get everything they need, emotionally, physically, everything." "That's good," the psychologist replied with a warm smile. "But remember, children don't need perfection. They just need someone who stays, someone who listens, someone who shows up every day." Those words stayed with him long after the meeting ended. He walked back to the dining room and watched the children eating together, sharing little jokes only they understood. They looked up at him and waved, inviting him to sit with them even though they were almost done with dinner. He sat down, and they started telling him stories about the drawings they made earlier. Their voices overlapped, full of excitement, and he found himself laughing quietly, feeling the kind of joy he hadn't felt in years. A few days later, the authorities informed him that the final stage of the process had begun. There would be interviews, house checks, and evaluations. Normally, things like this would have made him impatient. He was used to decisions being made quickly in his world. But now he understood something important. These processes existed to protect children, and he respected that. When the officers came to visit his home, they were surprised by how prepared he was. The rooms he had set aside for the triplets were simple but warm. Filled with soft bedding and toys the children had chosen themselves. He didn't want to overwhelm them with luxury. He wanted them to feel comfortable, not out of place. The officers walked through the house, inspecting everything carefully. They sat with him in the living room afterward, asking questions about why he wanted to take responsibility for the children. He had thought long and hard about this. So when he answered, his words came easily. "I don't want them to grow up feeling unwanted," he said quietly. "They've already lost too much. I want to give them a home where they can feel safe, where they can grow, where they can be children again." The officers observed him closely. They didn't see a billionaire trying to impress them. They saw a man who cared deeply. Later that afternoon, the children joined him in the living room, holding picture books they wanted him to read. The officers watched as the billionaire sat on the floor, letting the triplets lean against him while he read stories in a gentle voice. It was clear that the bond between them was already strong. After the officers left, the children continued reading, but the billionaire couldn't help smiling to himself. He had never pictured himself sitting on the floor reading children's books, but now he couldn't imagine spending his evenings any other way. A week later, he received the call that changed everything. The authorities informed him that, after careful review, they believed the children would benefit from staying with him permanently. There were still legal steps to finalize, but the decision was made the triplets would become part of his life in a lasting way. When he ended the call, he sat still for a long moment. He felt something warm spreading through his chest. Relief, happiness, gratitude, something he couldn't quite name, but it felt right. He didn't tell the children immediately. Instead, he waited until they finished lunch and were in the garden playing with a ball. He stepped outside, calling them gently. They ran toward him with bright eyes, expecting he wanted to play with them. Instead, he knelt down to be at their level. "I have something important to tell you," he said softly. "Something good." The three little faces looked at him with curiosity. "You're going to stay with me?" he said. "Not just for a few days. Not temporarily. You're going to live with me, and I'm going to take care of you. Always." The children stared at him, stunned for a brief moment. Then one of them whispered, "For real?" "For real," he answered, smiling warmly. The next second, the triplets threw themselves into his arms. It wasn't a quiet hug. It was full of emotion, relief, joy, and something deeper that the children didn't have the words for. The billionaire held them tightly, feeling their small arms clinging to him as if they didn't want to let go. From that moment on, Their lives changed. The billionaire moved them into his home officially. But he made sure everything felt familiar and simple. He didn't want them overwhelmed by the size of the house. Instead, he let them choose how to decorate their rooms, picking soft colors and little details that made them smile. He spent evenings helping them arrange their toys and books, sometimes laughing when they argued playfully about where a stuffed animal should sit.